Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning, everyone in Malaysia, and a very good day to everyone outside of Malaysia. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man wala. Alhamdulillah, we are grateful to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala for His blessings and grace that we are allowed to be here today in a ceremony of knowledge where the Holy Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, described it as a gathering beloved to Allah, His angels, and everything inside the heavens and the earth. Today, we are grateful as the Center for Advanced Irfan Studies Malaysia, or abbreviated as treatises, is able to invite our beloved Dr. Muhammad Umar Faruque as the speaker for today's topic, which is the decline of philosophy and the rise of shallow thinking, challenges for the Muslim world. For your information, Dr. Muhammad Umar Faruque is the Inayat Malik Assistant Professor and a Tufts Center Fellow at the University of Cincinnati. He also holds a visiting scholar position at Harvard University. His highly acclaimed book, Sculpting the Self, which is published by University of Michigan Press in 2021, addresses what it means to be human in a secular post-enlightenment world by exploring notions of selfhood and subjectivity in Islamic and non-Islamic literatures, including modern philosophy and neuroscience. Dr. Faruque is the author of 3 books and over 45 academic articles which have appeared or are forthcoming in numerous peer-reviewed journals. He gives public lectures on a wide range of topics such as climate change, AI, ethics, and selfhood. He is also a recipient of numerous awards, grants, and fellowships, including the prestigious Templeton Foundation Global Philosophy of Religion Grant and the Title Ivy Grant, U.S. Department of Education. Before I invite our speaker to give his lecture today, I would like to remind all of you to switch off your microphone throughout the lecture session. The audience will be given chances to interact with the speaker after his lecture. No worries, you can interact with him, you can ask him, you can maybe criticize or maybe discuss with him issues regarding our topic today. And you are allowed to do so after the lecture session. Therefore, without further ado, I would like to invite our Assistant Professor, Dr. Muhammad Umar Faruque, to give his lecture. Dr. Faruque, you are warmly welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Shuaib, for that very kind introduction. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I'd like to begin by formally thanking the organization, treatises, for kindly inviting me to give this talk. And as you can see from the title, it's going to be quite a contentious topic. The title of my talk is The Decline of Philosophy and the Rise of Shallow Thinking, the Challenges of the Islamic World. And as you can also see, the topic is really, really wide in its scope. And so I have some humble thoughts to share about this topic, but I'm also looking forward to a lively Q&A session and your views as well. So before I go further, I think that I should explain a little bit about the key terminologies in the topic, especially about the terms Islamic world and philosophy, because people use them in all sorts of ways. So first of all, I can imagine some academics, especially academics in the Euro-American, my fellow maybe scholars in Euro-American Academy, they might wonder, what do I mean by the Islamic world? Because according to some scholars, there's no such thing as the Islamic world. So what am I talking about? Because Islamic world is so diverse, and it has, it means so many things to so many people. There's no unity, political or otherwise. So it's meaningless to talk about the Islamic world. And there's in fact a recent book where someone debunks the term. And I think there is some credence, there is some validity. One has to remember that Islamic world is really, really exceptionally vast and wide. And in terms of unity, yes, there are all sorts of problems. But if you look at how people are talking about it in the news media, or politicians, or even general people, you can see it makes sense. The term Islamic world still makes sense to people. That's why you're here. You see people using it, and it does seem to make sense. So the talk itself is not going to be on the Islamic world, or what do I mean by. I can easily spend a few hours on it, but in order to forestall any sort of ambiguities, I just feel like explaining the fact that although I do acknowledge the fact that it's a complicated term, but I think there is still issues, or there is still things through which you can talk about Muslims, you can talk about the Islamic world. Religion being one of many other topics. And again, religion itself is a complicated category, but I just don't want to spend all my time talking about it. I think people understand when I use the word Islamic world, because if you just push things to their lowest common denominator, you end up with a postmodern thinking where there's no way you can even talk about the challenges of philosophy in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, because even in Kuala Lumpur, even within its whole neighborhood in Kuala Lumpur, there are 10 different definitions or hundreds of different ways you can talk about challenges. So there's essentially no unity. So that's really no argument. And then the word philosophy again. Oh my God, that's another word, whether you look at it in Arabic, in Indian languages, or in modern languages, and also how we use it in contemporary academia. There are all sorts of definitions. But because I'm talking about the Islamic world, and the historical Islamic world, as well as the contemporary Islamic world, when I say philosophy, I don't have in mind exactly the term falsafa in Arabic, which is a Greek transliteration of the term philosophia, meaning love of wisdom. And in fact, that was a term used in Islamic thought to denote philosophy. That's one way to think about philosophy in Islam. But I think if we are thinking of philosophy as a broad category, it should include theological thinking as well as metaphysical thinking coming from, let's say, later Sufism of Ibn Arabi and others. And within Islamic philosophy, there are multiple different schools. So philosophy here denotes philosophical thinking, different schools of Islamic thought, both classical and contemporary. All right. So that's that about the terms. Let me now explain a little bit about what do I mean by challenges. Because again, if you say challenges of the Islamic world, you can think about political challenges, social challenges, and all kinds of challenges, right? And obviously, in the span of 30-40 minutes, I cannot exhaust the topic. So I don't have in mind all other. I acknowledge that there are all kinds of challenges facing the Islamic world, as there are challenges facing the West or other cultural parts of the world. But here I have in mind something like the intellectual challenges. So again, within the domain of intellectual challenges, you might think of, there are many things to talk about, challenges ranging from extremism to secularism to political Islam. Especially the challenge with extremism, is something people recognize, even people without technical knowledge of philosophy. And Western observers or outside observers, when they think about Islamic world, oftentimes today in the last few decades, they talk about extremism. But here my focus is more like the intellectual crisis, of which definitely one strand is a more Salafi, extreme, narrow way of defining Islam. But when I say challenges, I don't mean it's only that. In fact, the challenge that I'm thinking about, which I'll explain soon, is way deeper. And it encompasses secularism as well as extremism and even political Islam. But my focus here is the intellectual crisis that came about as a result of colonialism and modernity. So let's begin with the context. The kind of context that I'm talking about is the following. So the Islamic world, historically, after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as you know, there are many things, but at one point in the middle of the 8th century, there was there was a really remarkable event in history, which is known as the translation movement. So from the middle of the 8th century through the middle of the 10th century, for nearly 200 years or even more, Muslims have translated most of Greek intellectual sciences, books by Aristotle, some little one or two maybe by Plato, and but a lot of other books by other intellectuals, ranging from astronomy to engineering to mathematics to philosophy. So this is something we all seem to know a little bit, but what is often overlooked in both the Islamic world and the West is the fact that we inherited Greco-Roman in antiquity, just as the West itself, the Western world today, mainly America, the Western Europe, and some other the global North, just like these people also inherited, and they identified, they trace back their civilization, their history back to the Greeks and then the Romans. So this is something we sort of forget because it has also some implications. It does bring us face to face with the questions of Islam and the West, and even the question of in extremism and a lot of other things. But think about the implications. Think about the fact that it's not just the West which inherited the sciences and philosophy of Greek antiquity, but also the Islamic world. And think about the fact that for nearly 1400 years, especially not too much today, but for a long time in many parts of the Islamic world, Plato, Aristotle, Galen, and so many other Greek thinkers would be treated as fellow Islamic intellectuals, in the sense that Muslim thinkers, scientists will be in continuous dialogue with these philosophers as late as until modern times. We should not be thinking, today we live in a modern world, so this is all in the relics, it's all in the matter, the past. So that's not completely true. I'm going to come back to the question of decline and the fact that there is still some people, in fact, this particular institution is an example that philosophy, the intellectuals' understanding of the Islamic world has not completely disappeared. But anyway, that is the intellectual context of the Islamic civilization. And it's not limited to just sciences and philosophy, but also art and architecture. This is itself requires maybe a lot of time to unpack. But if you simply look at many Islamic countries, Iran, Turkey, and many other countries in the Middle East, if you look at their architecture, art, and even if you look at a lot of the ruins, they are Greco-Roman ruins. For example, there are so many towns, ruins of Greek and Roman towns in Turkey, and also in Syria, in Jordan, in so many other parts of the Islamic world. And it's not like this is unrelated to the present. So I don't know, there's so many examples I can give where you can see the sort of continuity between the Greco-Roman civilization and the Islamic civilization when it comes to art and architecture. Because when it comes to philosophy, science, we all know, because I just mentioned the translation movement. But there's so many examples. I just want to give one because I want to move on to other topics. There's so many things I want to talk about. So if you have been to Turkey, you've seen, or even if you have not visited Turkey, you have heard of the famous Blue Mosque. It's the famous mosque in Istanbul, and next to it is even more famous structure called Hagia Sophia, which predates Islam and was built around 6th century AD during the Byzantine times. And if you look at the architecture of Hagia Sophia, Byzantine church, a very famous one, now converted to a mosque. And if you look at Ottoman Muslimist architecture, the most famous mosques just across Hagia Sophia, you cannot but help think about the remarkable continuity between Ottoman architecture and Byzantine and Christian architecture. So much, and that's just one example among so many others, whether it comes to other arts and architecture or places where you can see this continuity. But that does not mean Muslims have just adopted wholesale in a Byzantine architecture without their own innovations. That's not obviously, there is also, of course, discontinuity. And I have not been to Indonesia and Malaysia yet, hopefully very soon, inshallah, at the beginning of next year. But I know that in the Malay world as well, when it comes to architecture, for example, there's a lot of Muslim architecture, or in China, that shows continuity with what came before, like the Buddhist or Hindu or Chinese architecture and art. This is something people forget, amidst all the kind of political turmoil and everything. The fact that the Islam also inherited Greco-Roman antiquity, and there was no conception of Europe and the West at the time of Plato and Aristotle. It was part of actually the Mediterranean world. Still today, if you visit some parts of the Greek world and the surrounding countries, you can feel in terms of food and culture the wider Mediterranean context. So people forget all that. They think of Islam and they think of just the religion in a very simple sense, and they think that beyond religion, there's very little intellectual substance left when it comes to Islamic culture today. So people mention something like the decline narrative, which is known to some of our intellectuals in the middle of 11th and 12th centuries. There was a famous attack on philosophy by this famous theologian whom we all know, namely Al-Ghazali, and he put an end to the intellectual edifice of Islam, and he put an end to philosophy. And since then, there was very little philosophical activity. And now, there have been, hundreds of articles and scores of books debunking that view, that's not true at all. That's just that's part of an Orientalist narrative, kind of trying to argue that Islam has nothing substantial to contribute to humanity or human culture after 12th century. So maybe if I have time, if the context allows, I'll come back to that. Because you'd often hear today, our intellectuals today, whether it's in Malaysia or in the Middle East or in South Asia, they are aware that, oh yeah, Islam had a golden age in science. And then, this because of theology, religious bigotry took over. And then, there's a long continuous line to today's extremism, which is of course not true. Anyway, when we come to the contemporary context, which is shaped by colonialism, modernity, and break with the tradition, the intellectual tradition, you see three types of intellectual today who are talking about the intellectual challenges of the Islamic world, whether it's extremism, secularism, or political Islam, or whatnot. So you have, according to my classification, the secularist, and then you have the Islamist, and then you have a third category, which I had to come up with because it's very hard to categorize this particular category. So it's very hard to group these particular intellectuals, whom I call post-Enlightenment thinkers, namely Sayyid Hussein Nasr, Naqib al-Attaz, Usman Bakr, some of whom you definitely know many of these writers, and Abdurrahman Taha from Morocco. Anyway, so there are, in terms of intellectuals who are responding to the challenges, you can think about three types: the secularist, the Islamist, and the post-Enlightenment thinker. So let's now give some examples. So I claim that there is a decline of philosophy and the rise of shallow thinking. And so what are some of the examples of shallow thinking? And of course, the next question would be how to overcome some of this. So let's kind of talk about this for the next 10 minutes. So you can actually, sadly, so there was definitely a time when, let's say from 9 through, I would say 15th centuries, or even if not 17th centuries, Muslims had a domination, whether it comes to politics, culture, intellectual life, and so forth. But today, I mean, we don't have to be an intellectual to acknowledge that we're not kind of leading the world in terms of science, technology, or even politics. I mean, we have a lot of problems. So let's not come up with an argument to cover up all of this. But so in that context, when I say shallow thinking, it's actually everywhere, and that's very unfortunate. Although there are reasons to be hopeful. There is some light at the end of some tunnels, but there's a lot of shallow thinking, whether it comes to science or economics, politics, even art and architecture, humanities in general, our education system. So you can spend hours and hours talking about criticizing the education system, politics, and disunity, so many things. But I want to just focus on one particular example because that's dominant, and it's also very subtle, and it also seems ubiquitous, and that is science. So when it comes to science, let's kind of analyze the attitude of Muslim intellectuals. So as I said, you have Islamists, you have secularists, and you have post-Enlightenment thinkers. So when it comes to science, those people whom I'm categorizing as Islamists, namely people who always like to quote the Quran and Hadith without context, or just preachers with hundreds of thousands of following around the world. They have a kind of very they love science, so they love to talk about what is called the scientific miracles in the Quran, especially the preachers. So here are some examples of such miracles. According to these guys, the Quran predicts the Big Bang theory. It describes the water cycle. It describes modern embryology. It describes and it tells us about so many other scientific facts that only with the benefit of modern science we came to understand or discover. After 14 long time after the advent of Islam. So this is just so. I mean, I don't want to spend time just debunking this because this puts science at a higher level than the Quran, because the Quran is valued not because of its intrinsic arguments or validity, but because science sort of validates a lot of the things in the Quran. That's why the Quran is good. And as you know, with science, one of the things that happens frequently is that the theories sometimes change. Even there's a paradigm change, as we know, from classical mechanics to relativity, and then from relativity to quantum mechanics. But let's say those are complicated topics. When it comes to simple understanding of things, even there, science improves, and every scientist kind of acknowledges that. So a lot of the times, you have a new understanding, or a new theory overturns an old theory. So those people, without understanding really the philosophy background and how the methodology of science, simply want to equate modern science with the Quran, because for them modern science is the pinnacle of modernity, and it's the symbol of achievement, our modern achievement in everything. So they have to somehow create a sort of a false bridge between modern science and the Quran. But when a new theory overturns an old theory, and you are kind of trying to say that this old theory X was something that is verifying something in the Quran, what do you do when you have a new theory that overturns that fact? You then have to you're forced to say the Quran, I never say as a Muslim that is wrong about that. But as a scientist, that's perfectly fine. Science can improve. There can be new theories, new paradigms. So science can be wrong, and there can be better understanding. So, even this kind of arguments show the kind of shallowness of that kind of thinking about science in the Quran. Now, the secularists. They observe the following: modern science is great and ubiquitous because it enables us to connect with each other instantaneously across thousands of miles, as it's now happening through Zoom. And then it also performs complicated surgeries, and it can almost mimic human intelligence now through ChatGPT and its latest versions. So this is just beyond the imagination of any classical civilization. We have all of these great technologies, discoveries, and so modern science is really the kind of it's the telos. It's something that we should all strive for. But this view is an outmoded and triumphalist view of science, which first of all confuses science with the technological successes of science. Let me repeat, all of the examples that I mentioned, they're technological successes of modern science. They're not science qua science. They're not science itself. And secondly, this particular view neglects to consider some of the disastrous consequences of scientific technology in such domains as climate change and nuclear weapons. In fact, one observes a growing dissatisfaction among an increasing number of intellectuals concerning this kind of scientific attitude. And I just don't want to burden you with a lot of names, but the secularists are going to catch up soon because they are always trying to copy what XYZ secular modern Western intellectual is talking about these topics. But if you look at the latest literature, if you look at the writings of some of the philosophers and science here now, and those people are also secular, you can see the pessimistic attitude. So let me read out to you a quote from a philosopher, from an analytic philosopher based in Canada, trained and in Princeton and also taught at some of the best universities here, namely Jan Zwicky. She says the following, quote, "Western civilization is over. By that, I mean the culture that replaced the European Middle Ages and began with the Renaissance, saw the invention of the printing press and the telescope, fostered the Reformation and the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, engendered capitalism and a host of European empires, persevered through the Romantic reaction, and went on in the 20th century to dominate global economic policy and social aspiration. It's finished. The signs are everywhere. Teetering economies, democratic institutions under threat, belligerent populism on the rise, ecological cataclysm on the horizon." And the quote goes on, and eventually her argument is that for all of these catastrophes around the world, you have to go back to a particular way of thinking that began with Galileo, Newton during the scientific revolution. And this is one of many quotes. So this triumphalist view of science that, oh, it gives us all of these benefits and so forth, it's hardly acceptable today to the intelligentsia here. Now, that's the secularists. How about the post-Enlightenment thinkers on science? Now, here I'm not going to detail what they think, but here, first of all, let me mention that this group of people like Syed Hussein Nasser, Osman Bakr, Nidal Ghassem, Basil Altai, Abdurrahman Taha, Mehdi Golshani, Naqib al-Attas, they're very few when you think about the entire Islamic world. And again, I mentioned a lot of these names. It's not like all of them agree on the question of modern science. In fact, there's a disagreement between, let's say, the Tunisian, I think he's originally from Tunisia, now based in the UAE, Nidal Ghassem and Nasser and al-Attas. But at least these people, why do I call them post-Enlightenment? Because they're not simply trying to repeat the kind of secularist argument, which which is outmoded. A, B, it's simply comes from the West without our any own intellectual input. This group of people, at least regardless, and again, I have my own disagreements with many of these people about XYZ issue, but I commend the fact that these people are making an attempt to connect with their own tradition, to connect with their own intellectual tradition, even if sometimes they are failing. For example, I don't find the arguments of Nidal Ghassem very appealing, but I still commend his effort to engage, for example, some Islamic thinkers when it comes to the question of Islam and modern science. So anyway, so there's still a ray of hope with this with this group of people. But again, as I said, there are very few. All right, that's an example of shallow thinking. So, but what is at the heart of this shallow thinking? What is the main problem? This is already 8:32, so I have to rush because I'm going to begin the main argument now. So what is at the heart of the problem? I gave one example, I gave you guys a context in it. But what is at the heart?
Dr. Faruque, you can take your time. You can take
All
your
right,
time.
thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
I'll still try to be precise in the time. So for me, the problem comes down to the intellectual problem. I'm not talking about, by the way, the political, social, those requires a different methodology, different, attitudes, etc. But when it comes to the intellectual crisis that I've been describing, the problem is what I call epistemic colonialism. That is really the root of the problem. And that itself it has several components, such as Eurocentrism, the Enlightenment ideology, and the ideologies of progress and modernity. So let's try to unpack this a little bit. So basically, when it comes to these three, when it comes to the secularists and the Islamists, even though in their respective, when it comes to their respective worldviews, uh, they are obviously they sit on the opposite end of the spectrum, but they still are united when it comes to the feeling that what came to us through the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and the Enlightenment, in short, through modernity, is innately superior to our own intellectual traditions. Whatever their merits might have been in the past, these intellectual, what do you call in Avicenna's philosophy, illuminationism, the Sufi metaphysics, even Arabic, Mullah Sadra's philosophy, these are all relics of the past. They're just irrelevant to current problems. That's that's the attitude of both the secularists and the Islamists. So they might have their own differences, but they're essentially united when it comes to their attitude toward the intellectual crisis and how they think about it. They both think our own past does not matter, and the what came to us through through Western modernity is innately superior. Now let's kind of try to unpack why is that is the case. How come they seem to hold that kind of view, which seems just problematic, right? On some level at least. So to see how Eurocentrism, which I said it's a component of epistemic colonialism, is built into our recent history. And here, actually, you can believe me, I've looked at so many different kinds of literatures, and also traveled across lots of different countries in the Islamic world and try to familiarize myself with as many different views as possible about these issues. So I'm actually very confident about some of these following remarks when it comes to epistemic colonialism and Eurocentrism. Actually, here you can see a kind of unity, sadly, about the Islamic world when it comes to the embracing of Eurocentrism and the Enlightenment ideology, even though they might be claiming, as religious or Islamists, and they might have an Islamist ideology, or if they don't, secularist ideology, they're actually united. So anyway, so to see how this is deeply entrenched, you have to go back to colonial times. So here, I thought of zooming in on a person called Thomas Macaulay, who was a British official in India, who sought to establish the need to impart English education to the people of Indian subcontinent. So this is the time, like nearly 200 years ago, 1835-36. So Macaulay has this famous quote, says, "I have never found." Now, so he wants to establish a new educational system, but there was already an existing system that in India, in the madrasa system, it's with its Arabic and Persian as the medium languages, and also Sanskrit for others. So he says, "I've never found one among these native people who could deny that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. The intrinsic superiority of Western literature is indeed fully admitted by those members of the committee who support the Oriental plan of education. We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. End of quote. Let me repeat the last bit. A class of people, persons, Indian in blood, but English in taste, in opinions, and in morals. Honestly, if you look at the kind of the average Muslim intellectual today, people who are supposedly they're supposed to represent the Islamic world at international forums, for example, at UN and others, you cannot but help agree. You cannot but help shake your, I don't know the correct expression here perhaps, but shake your hand perhaps in bewilderment, seeing how true was this British official's vision 200 years ago. He was so successful because he wanted a class of people who would be interpreters between them, the colonialists, and people who they govern, at the time. And even today, if many would argue there are other forms of colonialism, if not direct form of political colonialism. But these people, they may look brown. They might come from XYZ Muslim country. So here he says Indian in blood, but you can substitute the word Indian with Muslim. They may be Muslim in blood and color, but they're very much English when it comes to their opinions, morals, and opinion. That's why whenever you talk to them, you hear them talking about the challenges of the Islamic world. If you pay close attention to the vocabulary, the language, and even the manner of speaking, they don't reflect the Islamic world that has been there for centuries. I don't want to, that does not mean I'm demonizing this particular category of people. I'm not. And it's actually a moment of reckoning and, feel sad about this. The fact that it's like even Khaldun said, something like the conquered, people who are conquered, both politically, and they always adopt the manners, languages, in everything of the conquered, their conquerors. That is exactly the case. These people, whenever they talk, let's say, about human rights, the terminology, the arguments, they all come from, if you're familiar with Western history, Western intellectual tradition, it's coming from a Western tradition. So this begs the question: Are we supposed to live in a multipolar, multicultural world where there should be multiple cultures, because each culture, they have their long histories of culture, philosophy, science, or everything in the past is kind of has a preparatory kind of role that they would. Sorry, let me just rephrase. Everything in the past is significant insofar as they contribute to the rise of modernity. That's how that's how I'm describing Eurocentrism, which goes back to Hegel and others, as some of you might know. So they seem to already kind of give in. They seem to already believe that, as I said, our past, in fact, not just our past, even the past of other people, like Chinese people, maybe it's of very little consequence. So they maybe happen to be Muslim, but when it comes to their, everything else, it's just Western. And this is problematic. This is not a theological matter. It's not like if you adopt that kind of attitude, you'll be in hell. I'm not saying that. It's about, your own identity, your own, like, if we don't have our own identity, if, for everything else we depend on others, then how what is the point of defining yourself? You are just a self you are just a self through others. As Du Bois, the American philosopher Du Bois said famously, the self and other dichotomy. You lose your selfhood. You begin to look at yourself through the other to such an extent that you are actually not sure who you are at all. But you have adopted the terminology, culture, language of the other in such a way, in such a deep way, that nobody around you also has a clue who you are. So yeah, these people, and unfortunately, as I said, secular Islam is by and large, with a lot of some exceptions, we seem to think that all of the world's other intellectual traditions are mere religious training or informal education. In fact, Western civilization becomes the standard of culture, science, civilization. But there is more to this. Perhaps I'm simplifying on some level. So I anticipate some counter arguments. There will be a lot of secularists who might argue, well, the Muslim civilization with all of its, grandeur have had its time. But don't you think when it comes to our modern contemporary situation, how can you, how can you, begin to have even an intellectual dialogue without some key concepts such as the concept of citizenship, the state, civil society, public sphere, human rights, equality before the law, the individual, distinctions between public and private, and the idea of the subject, democracy, popular sovereignty, social justice, scientific rationality, and so on and so forth. But all of these come from European history. All of these come through the filter of Enlightenment and the recent European past. So we Muslims, even if we acknowledge that we should do something, but we have no other way but to adopt, but to just learn and learn and adopt in our own ways from Western Enlightenment. So I want to challenge this. Is this really is this, by the way, this seems to be the kind of in the background of almost in the lot of the intellectual conversations that you hear on television, whether it's extremism, as I said, even social issues or education. People no longer feel the need to go to our own, let's say, Islamic culture and see whether, in contrast to this common sense, so-called common sense judgment, that all of these concepts, key concepts and necessary concepts, and we all should acknowledge that if we're living in modern times, we have to have some of these concepts. But is it really the case that the Islamic civilization has nothing to contribute or did not have equivalence of some of these so-called modern concepts? Not at all. But we're not even bothering to look. We're not even bothering to find out, because we simply mean, oh, really? The concept of the individual, equality before the law, citizenship, civil society, by definition, these are modern concepts, because that's how we're taught in school. That's how we're taught our history, culture, everything, So that seems to be, you feel so sometimes so, you feel so many challenges, just to begin to have a conversation around this, because the people whom you're talking, it's so deep-seated, some of these ideas, that you first have to, before you think about solutions, before you think about the positive contributions and Islam's own kind of concepts around these arguments around these issues, you have to deconstruct this mindset, Eurocentric mindset, this epistemic colonialism, right? It seems so difficult because people just look at you, they have no clue, because they're so detached from their own intellectual tradition. Yes, we are still praying, thank God, that's good, religiously speaking. But when it comes to intellectual tradition in most parts of the Islamic world, apart from some good exceptions like Iran, Turkey, and the Malay world, and things here and there like Morocco, the education system and everything more or less in the Islamic world is such that it does not allow you to find that connection. Whereas here is the difference between us and the West. And again, I don't want to emphasize the Islam and the West too much, because I'm actually thinking about these categories in terms of friendship rather than kind of contrast, and rather than just kind of antagonism, which you often see in the media. For me, because as I said, Muslims equally, if not more, inherited the Greco-Roman antiquity, and you cannot talk about Islamic science, Islamic philosophy, and intellectual contributions and cultural artistic contributions of Islam to the humanity without the Greek and, let's say, Greco-Roman background. Of course, there are other aspects to it, other like the Indian civilization, that also something we paid attention to alongside. But let's also not forget, when it comes to Islam's own glorification, we all learn directly from others, and our own philosophers like Al-Kindi was open about it, open about learning the truth, learning things that shed light on on the nature of the world, nature of reality, it's an implication of your understanding of Tawheed at the deepest level, because this is about unity and interrelatedness. That's actually one of the paradigms, one of the bases of Islamic science and philosophy. Everything issues from the ultimate reality, which is one and infinite. And so all of these different manifestations or different cultures, they're indeed good things to learn from. And things that do not accord with our view of Tawheed, yes, we don't just accept them blindly. But now when it comes to the West, they also inherited the Greek world, let's say Greek philosophy and science. And they also talk about sometimes the dark ages, the long kind of hiatus, which again is a very problematic category. It's not at all true that there was a dark age. There may be a dark age for some parts of Europe when it comes to certain parts of Europe, but certainly not for other parts of the world at that time during the Middle Ages. But anyway, by and large, when it comes to the modern Western intelligentsia, you can see, despite all the varieties of different intellectual movements, let's say from postmodernism to versions of liberalism, let's say all the way from Foucault and Derrida to still, let's say, proponents of, I don't know, classical liberalism, you still see that continuity between their writings and the writings of their past or writings of, let's say, Greek and the writings of their Greek predecessors. So you see Foucault engaging with the Greeks. You see Derrida, even when he is misrepresenting, Pseudo-Dionysius or some other Greek thinker, there is still excuse me, they're still engaging with their past as they're talking about the post-Enlightenment situation, as Foucault is criticizing the Enlightenment. That seems to be a very big difference between the likes of these Western intellectuals and our intellectuals. Sadly, our intellectuals cannot even read Arabic, even though sometimes they may be Arabs. They cannot even read Arabic and Persian, let alone debate with Avicenna and with some other thinker. And it applies to other parts of the world where, in addition to Arabic and Persian, maybe let's say I know about the Han Kitab tradition in China, for example, Muslims. It was not the Greek civilization; it was the Chinese civilization, Confucianism, New Confucianism. Those are the traditions with which the Muslims of the 17, 18, or earlier centuries they engaged. But today, our intellectuals do not even have the capability. They do not even name. If you ask people to name 5 most Islamic intellectuals from the past, people would, struggle. So it's very sad, because in their eyes, it's even not necessary. Sorry, I think it's already 8:50. So how much time would you want to give me? I know I exceeded the time already. I think 5-7 minutes. I want to wrap up, if that's fine.
Yeah, that is fine.
Yeah. So thank you. And I also intentionally did not prepare slides because I wanted to keep it somewhat open-ended. This is a vast topic and a very important one, very timely one, about which so little is being discussed. So anyway, for our intellectuals, the ones who have policy-making rules, power, the one who you see kind of saying things or dictating things, for them it's not even necessary to know the past, because in their mind it's just irrelevant. Because the Enlightenment, on the other hand, the ideology of progress and modernity, it provides this grand vision, which is described by a Western scholar in the following. So I'm quoting now as a historian called Jonathan Israel from Princeton University, from his book Enlightenment Contested. The quote says, "For anyone who believes human societies are best ruled by reason, as defined by the radical Enlightenment," so he makes a distinction between radical and modern Enlightenment. Let's not get into that right now. Ordering modern societies on the basis of individual liberty, democracy, equality, clearly constitutes a package of rationally validated values, which not only were, but remain today, inherently superior, morally, politically, and intellectually, not only to postmodernist claims, but also to all actual, let me repeat, all actual and possible alternatives, meaning whether it's Islamic, Chinese, or whatever. No matter how different, national and post-colonial, and no matter how illiberal, non-Western, and traditional, the social values of the radical Enlightenment, in fact, in short, have an absolute quality in terms of reason, which places them above any possible alternative. End of quote. So you can see where they're coming from, and also the appeal of the Enlightenment ideology and progress to our own intellectuals. So to talk about all of this is not to say that there's nothing. As I said, I believe in the frontier of civilization, and I do believe that when it comes to intellectual issues, or when it comes to philosophical matters, metaphysics, it's an open-ended avenue. You always have to cultivate an open mind and be open to dialogue and learn from different people who may not share the same values and everything. But I believe in a culturally epistemic and pluralistic world. And in contrast to what I just quoted from Israel, and in contrast to our own secular or Islamists, whatever, because they also simply sometimes just blindly worship science. I'm not against science, of course. I personally studied and still study science, but science has its own history, context, and philosophy, all of that, which you need to understand. So different cultures have their long histories of science, and Muslims should cultivate science according to their own intellectual, philosophical worldview. That's where I'm coming from. So this should not be misunderstood as something, as an argument to advocate a view which asks us to go back to the past and simply memorize what XYZ philosopher has said and do what. I'm not saying that. Philosophy by definition involves a dialogue. There are always new questions, new challenges. But if we're not rooted in our own tradition, then the kind of the ingredients of our thinking, our arguments, may come from a tradition with which we may be at odds at the deeper level, which we may not understand. That's where I'm coming from, and it's very difficult for people to see. You'd only be able to understand what I'm talking about if you know that there can indeed be different philosophical intellectual paradigms. Modern Western paradigm is one among many others. It's not even the same with earlier Western paradigms. The worldview propagated to us by Dante or even Aquinas, or not to mention Plato, Aristotle, is very different from the modern worldview. And the modern worldview, it has its own advantages and disadvantages. So that's why you have Foucault, a postmodern thinker, writing in contrast to Kant's Vastes, I think, of again, what is enlightenment? I know the famous article by Kant. Foucault has a counter article about enlightenment, and he criticizes that. But we don't need to just go to Foucault to kind of see the drawbacks of the enlightenment ideology and criticize it. We have our own worldviews with which we're familiar. Then we should be able to see the shortcomings and the problems which people like philosophers like Zwicky and so many others are talking about. You talk about the greatness of modernity. How about the colonial genocides, killing millions of people in the Americas, in Africa, in India? We cannot simply shut down, we cannot simply obliterate these truths. We talk about the greatness of modernity, technological success of modern science, definitely true. Nobody can deny some of this. How about also the rising, climate change, which is going to destroy us very soon, and about which so many people from so many different spectrums are already so worried. How about even other problems of poverty and even extremism, which many would say is a modern problem, fundamentalism. So this means we have to be critical. We have to be critical of this Enlightenment and modernist ideology, which claims to be absolute. If you remember what I just quoted, this guy was actually saying that the values of the Enlightenment, they are actually absolute. He's not saying this is one option among many. I'm actually fine with that. I think there are many things we can learn even from Kant, Hegel, but I have my own strong criticism. I'm certainly against their racism as you can read in Kant's Physical Geography, despite the fact he was a great Western thinker. But to claim that this is an absolute worldview, it's a form of extremism. It leaves no room for other civilizations to coexist. And besides, this is not true. What if the Chinese civilization, the Japanese civilization, or intellectual traditions offer something better about our situation today? But you want to foreclose that. You want to preach this ideology of progress. Oh, time is inherently linear. Whatever in the past, whether art, architecture, it's already inferior. So this is problematic. What needs to be done? So what needs to be done is to delink ourselves from this Enlightenment ideology, which has its roots in the Renaissance. It's very complex, but we do need to study these things from our own intellectual, from our own standpoint. In particular, we need to pay attention to the Renaissance aggrandizement of human nature. It's birthing the idea of the individual by way of patriarch, and its mantra of power and domination over nature. Nobody saw at that time. For a long time, beginning with Descartes and their followers, people thought, oh, the goal of science and technology is to bring goods to human society. No argument about that. But also to dominate nature. Yeah, dominate nature to do what? To just destroy the climate right now, to the world right now. And nobody today would actually would in their sane mind repeat that kind of ideology. But if you go back to the fathers of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, it's there. The aim, what is the aim of all of this development? People always talk about development, progress, and so forth. What is the telos? Where are we going? These are the deep questions. Yes, some sort of betterment, definitely. We want to get lift people out of poverty and definitely enhance the societies, etc., etc. No argument. But we as human beings, we are not just material beings. There is a spiritual and a metaphysical dimension. And I wrote a book about this called Sculpting the Self, because people today tend to think, because of the success of computers and ChatGPT, human beings are just biological machines. You hear this Western, many scientists and technologists repeating, we are not just machines. There's much more to that. So we should study science. We should have our own philosophy of technology and all of that. But for that to understand, we have to understand the last few hundred years. All right. And also, when it comes to other domains, like political science, economics, we have to take our own history very seriously. We should not just blindly accept a Macaulay, because those guys didn't know a word in Persian and Arabic, let alone the intellectual history, came to us 200 years ago and simply said, oh, what did he say? A single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. Can you imagine what kind of and by the way, it's not just in India, in Africa, and I'm sure in the Malay world, you can find similar examples from British officials. In fact, that's how they still think. And in fact, they were successful in also making many of our intellectuals think the same way. Our own intellectual history has nothing to offer as we think about the challenges of, let's say, capitalism, especially in the face of climate change. That's not true. We have to take our own economic history seriously. Here, we can definitely benefit from Western system of education, by the way, and I'm personally trained in many different systems. And I was trained in Iran, in the UK, America, and also teachers from Indonesia, Pakistan, and the subcontinent. And so it was actually good for me to see different perspectives. So there are merits to the Western education and a lot of the things, but we can use some of these things. And as I said, I believe in friendship of civilization. The West has learned from us, we learn from them, and it's a friendship that continues. But if you really take out your own history seriously, you'd see so many examples. It's not just Ibn Khaldun, by the way. I know there are some good works on Ibn Khaldun in many parts of the Islamic world. There are many other Ibn Khalduns waiting to be discovered, like Abul Fazl, like Firishta and his mammoth theory of Hindustan, where he writes the history of India, for example, as a place that contains multitudes of religions and politics. Unlike other grand history books written by his fellow Muslims that trace the beginning of history to Muslim prophets, Firishta seeks to provide a unified history of Hindustan, namely India. In fact, India is a very problematic term from Firishta's Farishta, angel, his name literally, Firishta's perspective. So he was able to kind of write a pluralistic history, and it incorporates, on the one hand, Muslim prophets, but also Hindu deities like Indra. And I'm sure when it comes to local intellectual context of the Malay world, something similar has been done, or there are people who think the same way. And you can think about Abul Fazl's introduction to Mahabharata, which was translated. They were talking about harmony between the nation of Muhammad, so, namely Muslims, Jews, and Hindus, by making available their authentic books in clear and easy to understand translation. That's the difference. We tend to think, we believe that the idea of progress is eternal. It's not eternal. If that was eternal, why is it that the greatest, of our own intellectuals like Avicenna, or even some of the Sufis who normally hate philosophy, and Mulla Sadra, they would sometimes defend Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle against their Muslim counterparts. They were not saying, oh, Plato, Aristotle, whatever they said, it's like 2,000 years old, so it's irrelevant. Believe me, this is a very strange idea, but it has been internalized in our minds. And thanks to post-colonial education, you see, you travel around the world and everyone seems to understand this post-colonial language of enlightenment ideology and progress. So it's very difficult to disengage and delink from this false history that obliterates other parts of the world and confines to a sometimes very extremist ideology, I would say. So the concrete steps is definitely institutes like yours to revive Islamic intellectual learning. That does not mean, and I'm sure you guys have a better, you can explain better to me, the reason why I personally read Avicenna, bothered to learn Arabic, Persian, and other languages, European and Islamic, it's not just to memorize what Avicenna or Plato said. Philosophy does not work like that. If you look at the definitions of philosophy in the books of Mulla Sadra and others, they're very clear about tahqiq and taqlid, imitation, blind imitation that we normally do today, and real verification using our own intellect and mind. That's the attitude. That's why, I personally, I went to a very different background. I was actually studying economics. I was never taught even philosophy in the British system, so narrow the focus degree. But I would always come across these, sentences about the past, like, it was always kind of marginalized. So I felt, let's just look at what Plato, Aquinas, or whoever else wrote about whatever they wrote. I just want to see whether whatever we are told, it's true or not. And I began to read, even though I was just 19, the complicated books, Plato's Parmenides, or let's say Aquinas's books and others. And I begin to, wow, people in the past were not simple. Actually, very more complicated than we are. So it stands to our own reason. If we have the courage, then we would see that there are surprises. But it's not going to solve all of our problems. That's something we should also remind ourselves. But it's going to open new ways. It's going to create an Islamic thinking. That's what interests me, not this colonized way of thinking. Because when these people are talking, I'm reminded of Macaulay's quote. These people may be Muslim, Indian, whatever, according to Macaulay, blood, in appearance, in color. But as they speak, they just remind me of average Western, intellectual, who also, by the way, the modern Western intellectual, they also have largely forgotten the sophistication of their own traditions. They no longer take their own traditions seriously, Dante, Shakespeare, even Shakespeare, let alone Plato or Aristotle. But there's this ideology that nothing matters because science and modern philosophy, it's able to solve all the problems and give us solutions, whatever. Anyway, to end this rather forceful speech, yeah, as I said, I was saying, institutes like this, and then more global exchanges among thinkers. The Islamic world is really vast and multilingual, and there are exceptions. There are some people who are thinking, like Abdurrahman Taha, Sayyid Hussein Nasser, Rakib al Atas. But as I said, unfortunately, the number is, their number is really not that big. And then we also have to realize unity in what I call unity in diversity. Uh, because of a lot of complicated factors, whenever you hear the Muslim intellectuals talk, they're so deeply grounded in their local history that there's no grand global vision. So local history does matter, because otherwise you can't talk to your own people. Local intellectual context, local culture, it has been actually part and parcel of Islamic history, and even today, if you yeah, Islamic history. So what we have to do is combine local cultures with global vision, not simply espouse, propagate narrow nationalism, where we're talking, but we don't really care about grand vision and other Muslim thinkers. And then have is history and philosophy of science programs. Apart from one or two countries, we don't even seem to realize its importance. And then the translation movement, because a lot of us today don't read Arabic and Persian. Fortunately, there are some projects. You can mention New York Library of Arabic Literature, I think. It's trying to translate important books in Arabics. So today, actually, if you want to, as an intellectual, if you want to familiarize yourself with the philosophical traditions, you really don't need to spend that much time and learn really Arabic and Persian, even though that's preferable. There are enough books and articles in English or in French and German. It will only take few years if you're busy with even other jobs, but you'll get a good sense of the key categories of the Islamic worldview. And then, as I said, take our own history, political and economic history seriously, take our own art and architecture seriously. Anyway, it's a long list. So yeah, but I should, yeah, that's a long list, but here are the concluding remarks. So in the end, after delineating all of this, here is my concluding reflection. We might be comfortable offering our prayers as Muslims, but our mental ambience will be permeated by devastating Eurocentric ideas. We would hardly be able to overcome our fragmented self-image if we're not able to not able to dissociate ourselves from this Enlightenment ideology of progress and modernity itself, and also connect ourselves with our own tradition. Thank you.
Thank you
And
so
I'm
much.
really, really sorry it took 1 hour. I thought I'd be able to finish within 40 minutes, but it really took 1 hour.
Yeah, it's okay, no problem. I believe that everyone benefited greatly from your lecture just now, and it's a very amazing lecture. And for the audiences, we open the floor if you have any questions or if you want to interact with our beloved speaker today. And yeah, we give the chances if you want to ask questions. You can go on to the dear audiences. We have one here from Nuruddin. Prof, apart from Islamic civilization, can we say that this decline of philosophical thinking also occurred in Chinese and Indian civilizations, for example? In your opinion, are there examples of contemporary Indian and Chinese philosophers who are rooted in their classical intellectual traditions in the current contemporary era? And another question also by him, does the decline of philosophical thinking in Muslim world explain why the Palestinian problem has not been resolved until now? Three questions, I believe, from Nuruddin.
Uh, so let me deal with the first part of the question. I think it's a very important observation. The second part is kind of beyond the scope of this lecture. So let's kind of, if we have time, maybe I can think about it. But let's deal with the first part, which is more pertinent to the topic at hand. So it's it's partially true. So China, as you know, India was colonized by the British, but the China was never, at least central parts of the China were not colonized, although some parts of China were colonized. But and some Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Iran, at least parts of them, they were not colonized. But there's not much difference. Even though they were not politically colonized, they're intellectually, epistemically colonized. So when it comes to when it comes to their thinking, you can see the same colonized attitude by and large. But it was not a total eclipse, thankfully. So yes, you can definitely, even as I said, in the Islamic world, the philosophical thinking has not completely disappeared. You can think about the example of Iran and also some parts of Turkey, but especially Iran, where I saw it firsthand, the kind of philosophical activity in many different domains. But when it comes to Chinese and Indian philosophies, yes, there was also definitely some kind of decline, but not completely. And now you can see a kind of revival, which is actually very interesting. In China, I can think of Du Weiming. I can think of many other contemporary Chinese thinkers. And again, there are different attitudes. Just as in the Islamic world, you have the secularists, you have people who think the past is no longer important. You have a lot of Chinese intellectuals who believe that, but you also have a substantial number. That's hard. I would be somewhat careful, but there's a lot of Chinese thinkers, new Confucian thinkers, or Taoist thinkers, who who understand the value of their own Chinese standpoint when it comes to modern challenges. Same with India. You can think of Janardhan Ganeri, and he single-handedly revived, especially or managed to establish Indian philosophy in Western academia. But beyond Ganeri, there are so many others within India, less known here. I personally engage with many of these Indian thinkers in my book, Sculpting the Self. I can think of Mukherjee, Bhattacharya, and Radhakrishna, and so many others, and also who are contemporary Indian. Of course, even some people like Tagore, not technically a philosopher, but wrote poems imbued with philosophical thinking. So in India, there's a lot you can talk about. And now, actually, despite the political turmoil and the problems that we are seeing in India, there's also a revival of Indian thinking in different domains, in politics, in economics. So this is good, even though these same intellectuals, I don't know how open they are when it comes to other traditions, but it's better than simply thinking their own past, especially Indian philosophy. By the way, I consider Muslim, in Islamic philosophy also as part of Indian philosophy, by the way, because we're not just thinking about Hindus, right? We're thinking about Buddhists who no longer live in India, but Muslims have been doing philosophy in India for 600 to 700 years at least, and wrote so many books in Arabic, Persian, Urdu, and they were actually also received well sometimes by Hindu intellectuals in earlier centuries or even now. So if you include Buddhist philosophy as part of Indian philosophy, Muslim philosophy is also included, and it has not completely died out. So I personally believe, now that we talk about the post-Enlightenment order, we have all of these Western intellectuals themselves realize the intellectual crisis of modernity. That does not mean they simply say that we have to go back to Plato and Aristotle. Sometimes they don't have an answer. But in the case of other civilizations, I think you'll see more and more new thinking. Yes. Yes, I did mention, yes, Janardhan Ganeri. Yeah. So is there the next question? Is there another question or follow-up?
Yes, there is one question here by Burhanuddin Baki. How would you characterize the support for proper philosophy departments in universities located in Muslim countries? My impression is very weak, and the number of such departments is very small per country, even though the fortunes of such departments are already declining in other non-Muslim countries too. By Burhanuddin Baki.
Sure. Support a proper philosophy in Islamic. Yes, I think I would agree. Unfortunately, these are called philosophy departments, but thanks to epistemic colonialism, these should actually be called Western philosophy departments, because they hardly teach anything other than Western philosophy. Even when they teach other philosophies, it's usually so marginal, so insignificant, it's not even worth mentioning. Here are some examples. As I said, Iran, Turkey, and some other countries, Malaysia, Indonesia. I think there are some notable exceptions. But even in these countries, unfortunately, not just philosophy, when you say political science departments, people would begin with still Aristotle and then Locke and then I don't know, Hume and then Rousseau, Kant and Hegel and up to Rawls and beyond and so forth. And Machiavelli, of course, I left out. But for them, when you say economics, political science, there's the assumption of universality. It's as if when you say philosophy, it's in reality it's just Western philosophy, but it gives the appearance of universality, like it speaks for philosophy in general. So, but people do not even notice, and because they don't have an alternative paradigm, or they're not even interested. So that's so sad. And also the way philosophy is being taught, it's so second rated, because they're just like some other similar departments in other fields, they're trying to copy what people are saying here, but by the time they really come to more contemporary times, those things become even useless here, or margin or insignificant, so or irrelevant. The state of education, especially when it comes to these more important disciplines like philosophy, is unfortunately, yes, that's where you really see shallow imitative thinking. There's not even Islamic thinking at all, much, let alone kind of independent thinking, apart from some exception. I don't want to say everybody is like that. And someone had a comment: by communicating in English has conditioned us to be Eurocentric, because 90% of English literature are Eurocentric. That's in a way true, but if we want now, as I said, there's a sizable literature on Islam and various dimensions of Islam in English or in French. So if we really want, we can actually overcome this Eurocentrism. But our intellectuals are not even aware, because they have been fed this myth that there was a kind of decline, as I mentioned, which never happened, by the way. So it's been debunked so many ways by so many scholars. And also the fact that the past is just irrelevant. Those attitudes prevent us from having a dynamic, critical, by the way, critical relationship. Because when you have an uncritical relationship with the past, in fact, that also can be problematic.
We have another question here, two questions here by Nuruddin. Prof, as far as I know you, you study environmental philosophy deeply. What is your view of the opportunities for the contribution of the Islamic scientific tradition to the development of ethics towards animals today?
Well, it's a vast topic, so I can only refer to the relevant literature. But this is something, again, it's a if you because we're talking about the challenges, and sometimes the challenges of the Islamic world are also global challenges. For example, if you list some of the biggest challenges that we're facing today in the world, you would always see climate change ranking within the top 5. So this is a global challenge, but it's also a challenge for Muslims. And this is a field where you might be thinking, how can we contribute? So how can studying philosophical Sufism or like Islamic philosophy be helpful? So it will not be directly helpful, because this was not a problem at the time of Avicenna, for example. He didn't have to talk about climate change as an issue. But there's a lot on there's a lot of literature on nature. And thankfully, there have been some secondary scholarship, like Said Hussein Nasr already a lot on nature. But that's just one aspect. Climate change as a whole, and also environmental ethics, there's a lot. So if you just do some searching, you'll find a good deal of literature. But when it comes to robust environmental philosophy, I think compared to Western thinking, compared to the books that have been coming out from Western academia, there's no comparison, that you can make with the Islamic world, because we only have just few books here and there. So there's a lot, and there's a lot that if you can learn from the past, but at the same time, you also need to engage your critical abilities and philosophize in order to really make relevant how some of the theories in the past, for example, the theory of wahdatul wujud, can be understood in terms of interrelatedness, or what I call the interconnected universe. But it will not be understandable to people who just studied Sufism or who just studied environmental philosophy. So we have that challenge to make to kind of explain a new philosophy in Islamic environmental philosophy in a language that would be understood by everyone. So that's a challenge, and that requires a lot of philosophical thinking. And that's why it's so important to have I've been emphasizing again and again, dynamic relationship with our own tradition. Just like if you look at Western tradition, as I said, even Foucault and Derrida, despite being postmodernists, they're still engaging their Plato's, their Aristotle's. So yeah, the same can be said of the challenge of artificial intelligence, about which I've been also researching. I think when it comes to theories of consciousness, there's a lot that we can learn from the tradition, but then it's not simply a matter of translation and just copy paste. That would not make sense, because they had to use different vocabulary. The context was different. Besides, they did not have the specific challenge of technology, the artificial intelligence technology that we're facing. So we have to do thinking, and that's why philosophy matters. Because philosophy here, I'm defining not as a theology, not as just saying, oh, this is what Plato said. Plato, in fact, by the way, people always misunderstand him. He wants you to have your own intellectual worldview, do your own thinking. So that's why philosophy matters. That's why I think we need to have advanced institutes to promote thinking and dialogue. And unfortunately, there are a lot of challenges, and one challenge also from the religious side, by the way. Now the secularists have their own ways of kind of debunking the tradition, but the religious Islamist also has their own own set of reasons. They also don't understand the value of. That's why there is Salafism. Salafism cannot solve this complicated problem other than simply saying the Quran says this. The recycling is good. Environmental philosophy is not just recycling; it's way deeper. It's about understanding what the human being is, what nature is, what is the relationship, and what underlies the relationship, the ethical relationship, and why should you even care about the relationship? Those are intellectual questions that require thinking.
Thank you, Dr. Farouk, for your answer. I believe this is the last question, also by Nuruddin, and I picked the last question that he posted here in the chat. Prof, you mentioned the need for science to be built from an Islamic framework. Do you agree with the idea of Islamic science voiced by Nasser, or the Islamization of knowledge voiced by Al-Attas and Al-Faruqi, for example?
That's a good question. So I have my own, as I said, disagreements with the post-Enlightenment thinkers. So I personally see this is the best option we have, because these people are critically thinking, engaging with the tradition. And so Islamization of knowledge has its, as a step, as a very first step, I see it as something good. But then it's when you think about what the relationship between science and Islam involves, you begin to see it's way more complicated than simply Islamizing science. You can't simply Islamize. It's way more complicated than that. By the way, what we observe in the Muslim world is actually the very opposite. We see a wholesale adoption, and so Islamize in terms of sprinkling some verses of the Quran and say that the Quran agrees with, would not work. So we have to go back to we have to probe, investigate the respective worldviews of modern science and the respective worldviews of Islamic philosophy or Islamic metaphysics. Those are the issues at heart. Now, there is not just one version of one particular worldview within Islam. There is also not just one way to have a philosophy of science within the West, but there can be few, but it will not be like infinite. There's a way to make sense of that. So as we begin to study, go to the heart of the problem, go back to the very root of modern science, Galileo and his primary and secondary qualities distinction, and Descartes and his discourse and new methodology of science he lays out there, and then the res cogitans and res extensa, the mind body dualism that Descartes is famous for. As we study all this and study the mechanization of the cosmos by Newton, even though he does not use that phrase maybe once or twice, and then how the Enlightenment ideologues, the French encyclopedies kind of popularized this worldview, we realize that it's a multifaceted problem. There's philosophy, there are philosophical arguments, there's also political context, there's also social context. And that's why in the West there are departments called science and technology studies. They study this thing from multiple standpoints, and you begin to see how science is not just a disembodied entity, just kind of mathematical formula. It's not. It's never that. It always has its context. Similarly, Islam is also multifaceted, but its worldview at bottom is centered on Tawheed, undeniable across the board, even though you can have multiple interpretations of what that oneness means, to what extent everything can be integrated into that perspective. So yeah, for me, that's the challenge. How do you, on the one hand, study quantum mechanics and its views on matter and the world as a whole, and then come to terms with what Islamic metaphysics as a whole teaches you? For me, the question is not about rejection. That's just with knowledge, that it doesn't work like that. It's about meaningful integration. It's also being aware of sometimes irreducible differences. Like for many, if not the most scientists, the methodological naturalism is like it's like the backbone. So you cannot agree with that, but that's a philosophical standpoint. You disagree with that philosophy of science, but you can still incorporate meaningful facts, theories here and there from biology, molecular biology, or how quantum mechanics sheds lights on nature of time and space. So it has to go in that direction. And unfortunately, our scientists, some of them may be very good when it comes to these modern fields. They don't, apart from one or two, they don't even show interest in that philosophy. So that's a really sad thing, and that's something we should try to overcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad Omar Faruq, for your amazing answer to all the questions today. But due to the time constraint, I need to announce that we have to close the question and answer session. Thank you everyone who asked the question and interact with our speaker today. Maybe Dr. Umar Farouk, there is a way to contact you in case the participants have their questions to you.
Yes, you can reach out to me. Yes.
Is it through your email or something, or maybe your phone?
Yes, through my email.
Through your
Yes.
email, all right.
Yes.
I believe that your email can be accessed through your institution website, right? Yeah.
Yes, I get a lot of emails, so I'll try my best to respond, but it might take time. So please consider those, those facts as well.
Yeah. No problem, Dr. Muhammad Umar Farouk. I believe that everyone is already acknowledged about your situation. Okay, thank you everyone who are present today, and our most grateful our most grateful gratitude is given to you, Dr. Umar Farouk, for your willingness to be with us today, giving your lecture and imparting knowledge. And I believe that everyone has benefited greatly from your thoughts, from your lectures, and also from your answers today. And I hope that this is not the last engagement that we will have, inshallah.
Inshallah, and thank you so much for inviting me and for allowing this exchange. I also definitely learn a lot from these exchanges, and inshallah, let's be in touch.
Alhamdulillah, inshallah. I hope that everyone will also re-listen to this lecture another time, inshallah. I mean, and that is all for today. The recording for this lecture can be accessed later on in the YouTube. We will be passing on to the groups for the recording. And yeah, that is all for today. I close the session with wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And thank you everyone. Inshallah.